That cold morning, no one expected an act of kindness to change everything. What started as another day on the road became a story the whole town tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here, we show that behind the engines and the leather, there are still human hearts. The envelope sat unopened on the chipped Formica table of Emily's trailer, its crisp white edges cutting through the clutter of unpaid bills and a half-empty coffee mug. Outside, the Nevada desert wind whispered against the aluminum siding, carrying the faint rumble of semis on the interstate. Emily stared at it for a long moment, her fingers hovering like they might burn if they touched. 10 years. It had been 10 years since high school, since the laughter that echoed in hallways like shattering glass, since the nicknames that clung like dust to her skin. Loser. Freak. The words weren't just cruel. They were a verdict, delivered by the popular crowd with the casual certainty of kids who owned the world. She finally tore it open, the paper rasping softly in the quiet kitchen. The invitation spilled out. A glossy cardstock affair, embossed with gold lettering for the class reunion at the old community hall in Reno. "Join us for memories and milestones," it proclaimed, as if the past were a fond scrapbook rather than a scar. Emily's breath caught. She hadn't heard from any of them in a decade, not since graduation when she'd slipped away like smoke, vowing never to look back. But here it was, addressed to her full name, Emily Harper, with a handwritten note at the bottom. "Can't wait to catch up. The planning committee." She knew what that meant. Whispers from old mutual friends on social media had trickled in over the years. How the golden kids, the ones who'd ruled the pep rallies and parties, still gathered in their polished lives, trading stories of successes and spouses. And now, this. An invitation to parade her failures before them. Emily leaned back in the creaky chair, her calloused hands, rough from years scrubbing plates at the roadside diner, rubbing at her temples. At 28, she looked older in the harsh morning light filtering through the blinds, faint lines around her eyes from long shifts under fluorescent buzz, hair pulled into a practical ponytail that hid the awkward girl she'd once been. High school had been a battlefield of invisibility for her. Overweight then, with braces that glinted like warnings. She'd been the easy target. Lunch trays accidentally spilled, lockers stuffed with cruel doodles, invitations to events that turned out to be pranks. The ringleader, Chad Ellis, with his quarterback smile and unshakable confidence, had made it sport. "Hey, loser, got a date for the dance? Oh, wait, mirrors don't count." The class had laughed, a chorus that drowned out her protests. She'd endured it in silence, too ashamed to tell her overworked mom, who was fighting her own battles with cancer by senior year. Now, the trailer felt smaller, the walls pressing in with memories. Emily worked at the Dusty Rose Diner, 10 miles off the highway, serving truckers and wanderers who asked no questions. It was a life on the margins, steady if unglamorous, tips in crumpled bills, the sizzle of bacon masking the ache of solitude. But it was hers, built from the ruins. No husband, no kids, just the quiet rhythm of dawn shifts and evening walks under star-pricked skies. The invitation mocked that fragile peace. Why now? Why her? She crumpled the card in her fist, but something held her back from the trash. Curiosity, maybe, or the masochistic pull of proving them wrong. The diner's bell jingled in her mind, pulling her back to routine. She had to get to work. The breakfast rush wouldn't wait. Grabbing her keys, Emily stepped into the chill air, the gravel crunching under her worn boots. The desert stretched endless, dotted with sagebrush and the occasional flicker of heat lightning on the horizon. As she drove the old pickup toward the highway, the radio crackled with a weather report, thunderstorms rolling in by evening. Fitting, she thought, for a night of old storms brewing anew. At the diner, the morning unfolded in its familiar haze. The clatter of plates, the hiss of the coffee urn, the low murmur of patrons nursing hangovers or heartaches. Maggie, the waitress who'd become a reluctant mentor, slid a fresh pot her way. "You look like you seen a ghost, hon," she said, her voice gravelly from years of cigarettes and sympathy. Emily forced a smile, tucking the invitation into her apron pocket. Maggie was in her 50s, widowed young, with a laugh that cut through the grease like sunlight. She'd seen enough drifters to spot a wounded one. "Just old mail," Emily muttered, pouring refills with mechanical precision. But Maggie's eyes lingered, wise to the weight of unspoken burdens. By midday, the lunch crowd thinned, leaving Emily wiping down counters sticky with syrup. She pulled out the card again, tracing the elegant script. The reunion was tomorrow night. Catered food, a DJ spinning hits from their era, name tags for the successful. She imagined the faces. Chad, now a real estate hotshot with a trophy wife. Lisa, the cheerleader turned influencer, her life a curated feed of vacations and veneers. They'd toast their triumphs. And then, what? Pity her? Prod at her single status, her dead-end job? The thought twisted like a knife, but beneath it simmered a defiance she'd long buried. 10 years was a lifetime. She'd survived. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the parking lot, a familiar rumble echoed from the highway. Emily's pulse quickened. It was them. The Iron Wolves. The biker crew that had become her unlikely family. They'd rolled into her life 3 years back, after a rain-slicked night when their president, Jax, pulled over to help with a flat tire on her truck. No judgments. Just grease-stained hands and quiet words. Jax was a veteran, his eyes shadowed by tours in the sandbox, his leather vest patched with symbols of loyalty over vengeance. The Wolves weren't outlaws in the Hollywood sense. They were mechanics, guards, guardians of the forgotten stretches of road. They'd fixed her truck that night, shared a meal at the diner, and somehow stuck around. Birthdays marked with engine roars, holidays with backyard fires. Jax called her kid, but his protection ran deeper, a silent vow against the world's cruelties. The bikes pulled in now, a line of chrome and thunder, dust swirling in their wake. Jax dismounted first, his boots hitting pavement with a solid thud. He was broad-shouldered, salt and pepper beard framing a face etched with quiet resolve. "Heard you got mail," he said, nodding at her pocket as if reading minds. Emily hadn't told him, but the Wolves had a way. Eyes everywhere, loyalty like radar. She hesitated, then handed him the card. His brow furrowed as he read, the wind tugging at his vest. The others, Rico, the wiry mechanic with tattooed knuckles. Lena, the only woman in the pack. Tough as rebar but soft-spoken, gathered loosely, engines ticking as they cooled. Jax folded the card slowly, his gaze meeting hers. "You goin'?" It wasn't judgment, just a question heavy with implication. Emily swallowed, the desert air dry in her throat. For the first time in years, the idea didn't feel like defeat. With them, it felt like armor. "Maybe," she whispered, the word hanging between them like the first drop of rain. Jax nodded, clapping a hand on her shoulder, firm, reassuring. The Wolves didn't push, they protected. As thunder grumbled in the distance, Emily felt the shift, a moral crossroads gleaming under the fading light. Tomorrow wasn't just a reunion, it was reckoning. The thunder rolled in like a distant judgment that night, sheets of rain lashing the diner's windows as Emily wiped down the last of the tables. The Iron Wolves had lingered longer than usual, their presence a low hum against the storm's fury. Boots scraping linoleum, the scent of wet leather mingling with cooling coffee. Jack sat at the counter, nursing a black mug, his eyes fixed on the downpour as if it held secrets. Rico tinkered with a loose faucet under the sink, his tools clinking softly, while Lena leaned against the jukebox, arms crossed, her gaze flicking to Emily every few seconds. They hadn't pressed her about the invitation, but the air between them thickened with unspoken support, a quiet web of loyalty woven from years of shared silences. Emily busied herself restocking napkin holders, her hands steady, but her mind churning. The card burned in her pocket like a live coal. She'd spent the afternoon replaying high school fragments, the sting of cafeteria whispers, the way Chad's laugh had sliced through the air like a blade, leaving her bleeding invisibly. Back then, she'd hidden in the library, burying herself in books about far-off places, deserts she'd one day call home, roads that promised escape. Her mom, frail from chemo, had squeezed her hand one evening, whispering, "They don't define you, Em. Strength's in the quiet ones." Those words had been her anchor, even as the cancer took her mom just after graduation. Emily had packed a single bag and driven west, chasing horizons that blurred tears with dust. Now, as the clock ticked past closing, Jack set his mug down with a deliberate clink. "Storms passin'," he said, voice gravelly from old wounds and older regrets. He was a man who'd seen too much, deployments that left scars not just on his body but in the hollows of his eyes. The wolves were his redemption, a brotherhood forged in garages and graveyards, not glory. They'd pulled him from the bottle after his divorce, given him purpose in fixing what society broke. "You decide yet?" he asked, not looking at her directly, giving her space to breathe. Emily paused, cloth in hand, the rain's patter fading to a drizzle. "I don't know. It's stupid, right? Walking into that like nothing's changed." Her voice cracked on the last word, betraying the tremor she'd fought all day. Lena pushed off the jukebox, her boots soft on the floor, and slid onto a stool beside her. Lena was ex-military too, a medic who'd patched up brothers in the heat of sandstorms, her arms inked with faded dog tags. She didn't coddle. She cut through. "Stupid's lettin' 'em win twice," she said, her tone even, like stating a fact about engine oil. "You go. You show 'em the woman you became. We got your back." Rico emerged from under the sink, wiping his hands on a rag, his face smudged with grime. He was the youngest, barely 30, with a quick grin that hid the foster homes that had toughened him young. "Hell, I'll tune up the rides, make an entrance they won't forget." His words hung light, but his eyes held the weight of someone who'd been the outsider once, scraping by in a world that labeled before it looked. Emily felt the knot in her chest loosen, just a fraction. These people, these wolves, had seen her at her lowest. 2 years ago, after a bad breakup with a drifter who promised more than he gave, she'd shown up at their garage in tears, truck sputtering. They hadn't asked questions. They'd fixed it, shared beers around a fire pit, and listened when the words finally came. Jax had nodded through her story of abandonment, his own losses echoing in the firelight. "Family ain't blood," he'd said then. "It's the ones who stay." From that night, she'd been under their wing, not a member, but protected, like the stray dog Rico had adopted and named Shadow. The diner door creaked open, letting in a gust of damp air, and Maggie shuffled in from the back, her apron tied loose. She'd overheard enough to piece it together, her maternal instincts sharp as a switchblade. "If you're going, hun, don't go alone," she said, pouring herself a decaf. "Those high school types, they peak early. You're just revving up." Her words landed soft, laced with the wisdom of a woman who'd buried a husband and raised 2 boys on diner tips. Emily managed a real smile, the first of the day, as the group fell into easy chatter. Tales of road mishaps, a rival crew's botched poker run. The storm outside mirrored the one inside her, clearing to reveal stars pricking the black sky. By midnight, the wolves mounted up, engines coughing to life in the lot, headlights cutting through lingering mist. Jax lingered last, helmet under his arm. "Think on it, kid. Doors open if you want company." He swung a leg over his Harley, the machine growling low as he pulled away, tail light fading like a promise. Emily locked the diner, the keys jangling in her palm, and drove home through puddles that reflected neon from a distant sign. The trailer welcomed her with its familiar creaks, but sleep evaded her. She lay on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling fan's lazy spin, the invitation on the nightstand like a gauntlet thrown. Dawn broke gray and unforgiving, the desert air crisp with sage and wet earth. Emily rose early, the decision crystallizing in the quiet. Yes, she'd go. Not for them, but for the girl she'd buried under years of survival. She called in sick to the diner, Maggie's knowing "take care" echoing in her ear. By noon, she stood before the cracked mirror in her bathroom, trying on a simple black dress from a thrift store find. Nothing flashy, just fitted enough to hint at the strength she'd built. Her hair fell loose for once, framing a face that no longer hid. The braces were gone, the awkwardness shed like old skin, but the eyes, those held the fire of endurance. The phone buzzed mid-afternoon, Jax's number lighting the screen. "Rides are ready? We roll at 6?" His voice was steady, no pressure, just the hum of loyalty. Emily's hand trembled slightly as she gripped the phone. "Yeah. All of you?" A pause, then his low chuckle. "Wouldn't miss it." She hung up, heart pounding like an engine at idle, the moral weight settling in. This wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. The town of Reno waited, its community hall a stage for old ghosts, but with the wolves at her side, the script was hers to rewrite. As evening crept in, shadows lengthening across the trailer park, Emily stepped outside, the air humming with anticipation. The rumble started faint, building to a thunder that shook the ground. The iron wolves, arriving not as invaders, but as guardians. Jax led the pack, his bike gleaming under the sodium lights, the others fanning out like wings. They didn't roar or rev. They idled respectful, a quiet force. Emily climbed onto the back of Jax's ride, her arms wrapping around his waist, the leather warm against her palms. The wind caught her hair as they pulled onto the highway, the desert blurring into the rear view, Reno's lights winking on the horizon. The road unwound like a vein, pulsing with the unknown. Emily felt the vibration through her bones, a rhythm that drowned doubt. For the first time, the past didn't loom as a monster, but as a shadow she could outrun, or face head-on. The reunion hall loomed ahead, strings of lights festive against the night, laughter spilling from open doors. But as the bikes crested the hill, engines a low growl, the air shifted. Eyes turned, whispers rippled. The class loser had arrived, not alone, but armored in brotherhood. And in that moment, under the flickering bulbs, the real story began to unfold. The parking lot of the Reno Community Hall gleamed under strings of white lights, cars parked in neat rows like soldiers at attention, sedans and SUVs polished for the occasion, their owners inside trading air-kissed greetings and champagne flutes. Laughter floated out on the warm evening breeze, sharp and nostalgic, laced with the clink of glasses and a faint bass line from the DJ spinning tracks from a decade ago. Emily's grip tightened on Jax's waist as the iron wolves slowed to a crawl, their engines a deep, resonant purr that cut through the chatter like a warning. Heads turned in the lot, silhouettes freezing mid-step, conversations trailing off into uneasy pauses. A woman in a sequined dress clutched her husband's arm, her eyes widening at the line of Harleys rolling in like shadows detaching from the night. Jax eased his bike into a spot at the edge, away from the clusters of luxury vehicles, the kickstand dropping with a metallic thunk. The others followed suit, Rico killing his engine last, the sudden silence amplifying the distant hum of crickets and the muffled thump of music from within. Emily slid off, her legs steady despite the adrenaline buzzing through her veins, the black dress suddenly feeling too exposed under the scrutiny. She smoothed it with trembling hands, the fabric whispering against her skin, and met Jax's gaze. He nodded once. A subtle anchor in the storm of stares. Truckers and wanderers had gawked at them before. But this was different. This was judgment from people who'd once known her as the punchline. "Stay close," Lena murmured, falling in beside her, her leather jacket a barrier against the cooling air. The wolves moved as one, a loose formation that parted the lot without aggression, just presence. Rico cracked his knuckles absently, his easy grin masking the tension in his jaw, while Jax led, his broad frame cutting a path to the hall's double doors. Whispers chased them. "Who are those guys? Is that Emily, with bikers?" A man in a button-down shirt, someone Emily vaguely recalled as a debate team captain, halted by his BMW, phone half raised as if to capture the spectacle. She felt the old heat rise in her cheeks, the familiar shrink of wanting to vanish. But Jax's hand brushed her elbow, light as a promise. No retreat, not tonight. Inside, the hall bloomed with warmth and pretense. Round tables draped in white linen, centerpieces of wilting roses, a banner overhead proclaiming Class of 2013, Decade of Dreams. The air smelled of catered hors d'oeuvres, shrimp cocktail, and faint perfume, mingling with the undercurrent of cologne and regret. Clusters of former classmates milled about, name tags pinned to designer outfits, voices pitched high with tales of promotions and perfect families. Chad Ellis held court near the bar, his hair still quarterback perfect, arms slung around a blonde in heels who laughed at his every word. Lisa hovered nearby, her phone capturing selfies, her smile as curated as her Instagram feed. They hadn't spotted her yet, lost in their orbit of validation. Emily's entrance rippled through the room like a stone in still water. Conversations stuttered, eyes darting to the door where she stood flanked by the wolves, tattoos peeking from sleeves, vests patched with faded emblems of roads traveled and battles unspoken. A hush fell, broken only by the DJ's oblivious fade into Sweet Home Alabama. Chad turned first, his glass pausing mid-sip, brow furrowing in recognition. "Emily? No way." His voice carried, drawing more gazes. A mix of surprise and something sharper. Pity? Amusement? Lisa's head snapped up, her perfectly lined lips parting in a gasp that turned to a titter. "Oh my God, it's the loser. With her. Entourage?" The word landed like a slap, echoes of high school corridors bouncing back. Emily's stomach twisted, the room tilting under the weight of old verdicts. She saw it in their faces, the quick assessments, the bikers as thugs, her as the desperate has-been clinging to rejects. A woman Emily remembered as the class secretary leaned to her husband, whispering loud enough to carry, "What is this? A gang initiation?" She always was dramatic. Laughter bubbled up in pockets, nervous and cutting, phones emerging to snap discreet photos. Jax's jaw tightened, a muscle flickering under his beard, but he didn't react. His code was protection, not provocation. Lena's hand rested on Emily's back, a steady pressure, while Rico scanned the room like he was casing a garage for threats. Emily forced her chin up, the moral knot in her chest pulling tighter. This was what she'd feared. Not just the mockery, but the isolation it bred. The world's refusal to see beyond labels. The wolves weren't here to intimidate. They were her shield, drawn from the same margin she'd carved her life on. Jack stepped forward slightly, his voice low but clear, addressing no one and everyone. "Evenin'. We're just here for the reunion." Simple words, gravel rough, but they hung heavy, challenging the assumptions without raising a fist. Chad recovered first, his smile widening into something forced, clapping slowly as if applauding a punchline. "Well, look at you, Em. Upgrading from library lurker to biker babe? Bold move." The room chuckled, a chorus she'd heard before, but this time it cracked against the quiet resolve beside her. Something shifted then, small but seismic. An older man at a nearby table, Mr. Hargrove, The former history teacher who'd once pulled her aside after a particularly brutal prank, stood, his face softening with recognition. He'd been kind back then, slipping her extra time on essays, seeing the spark the others ignored. Now, he approached, weaving through the crowd, his steps deliberate. "Emily Harper," he said, voice warm over the murmurs. "It's good to see you." No qualifiers, no pity, just truth. He glanced at the wolves, not with fear, but curiosity, nodding to Jax. "Appreciate you all coming out. Means something." The words were quiet, but they pierced the tension, a thread of humanity pulling at the frayed edges. Chad's laugh faltered, the room's energy stuttering as more eyes lingered, not on the leather and chrome, but on the woman in the middle, standing taller. Emily met Hargrove's gaze, a lump forming in her throat, the first crack in the armor of her past. It wasn't redemption yet, just a glimpse, compassion blooming in unexpected soil, loyalty defying the stairs. The night stretched ahead, fraught with unspoken reckonings, but in that suspended moment, under the hall's garish lights, she felt the Brotherhood's silent justice take root. No one hurts those we protect, not without facing the quiet storm that follows. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and loyalty can travel. The air in the hall thickened like smoke from a dying fire, the initial hush giving way to a murmur that swelled and ebbed, carrying the scent of spilled wine and wilted flowers. Emily stood rooted near the entrance, the cool press of Lena's hand at her back a lifeline amid the shifting gazes. Mr. Hargrove's words lingered, a fragile bridge over the chasm of old animosities, but the room's undercurrent pulled harder, judgment laced with curiosity, the kind that dissected before it understood. Chad's forced smile twisted into something sharper as he sauntered over, his polished loafers clicking on the scuffed hardwood floor, the blonde at his side trailing like a shadow in heels. "Emily Harper," he drawled, voice pitched for the crowd. "You clean up nice. What's with the security detail? Afraid we'll spill punch on you again?" Laughter rippled out, brittle and rehearsed, from the clusters around the bar. Former jocks slapping backs, their wives exchanging wide-eyed glances. Lisa sidled up, her sequins catching the light like false stars, phone already angled for a story. "Seriously, Em, this is epic. Biker gang for a reunion? You're like a walking after-school special." The words stung, echoing the cafeteria taunts Emily had buried deep, but she felt the wolves tense beside her, Jax's shoulders squaring subtly, Rico's fingers flexing at his sides. They didn't lunge or shout. Their stillness was the thunder, a contained force that made the room's bravado feel small. Emily's throat tightened, the moral weight pressing in. Laugh it off and fade back into invisibility, or stand firm and risk the storm. She drew a slow breath, the faint hum of the air conditioner mingling with her pulse, and met Chad's eyes, blue and unyielding, just as they had been at 17. "It's been a while, Chad," she said, her voice steady, though her hands clenched at her sides, nails biting into palms. No venom, just truth, the quiet kind that exposed cracks. Hargrove hovered nearby, his presence a silent ally, but the crowd pressed closer now, drawn by the spectacle. A woman in a floral dress. Sarah. The yearbook editor who'd once scrawled, "most likely to disappear," under Emily's photo, tilted her head, feigning concern. "We were just teasing, you know. High school stuff. No hard feelings?" But her eyes flicked to the wolves, lingering on the patches sewn into their vests. Faded eagles and crossed wrenches, symbols of roads forged in hardship, not headlines. Jax shifted then, his boot scraping softly as he stepped half a pace forward, not blocking but encompassing. "No hard feelings here," he rumbled, his tone even, like gravel under tires. "Just friends seeing a friend through." The words landed soft but weighted, cutting through the pretense without a raised voice. The blonde at Chad's side fidgeted, her laughter dying into an awkward cough, while Chad's jaw worked, searching for the upper hand. He'd built his life on easy wins, real estate deals sealed with handshakes, a narrative of unchallenged success. But this was different. The wolves weren't props. They were flesh and bone, eyes holding stories of deserts crossed and losses carried. Rico caught Emily's glance, his nod imperceptible, a reminder of the garage nights when he'd shared his own scars, bounced between homes, finding family in the roar of engines. The DJ cranked the volume, Pour Some Sugar on Me blasting to fill the void, but it only amplified the unease. People drifted back to tables, yet the energy hummed, electric with unspoken questions. Emily felt exposed, the black dress suddenly a spotlight, but beneath it stirred something new. Defiance tempered by the warmth of loyalty at her flanks. Lena leaned in, her breath warm against Emily's ear. They're scared of what they don't get. Let 'em stew. Her words were a balm, drawing from the medic's calm that had saved lives in chaos, now extended to this quieter battlefield. As the night wore on, the mockery simmered rather than boiled over. Chad retreated to the bar, ordering another round with exaggerated flair, but his glances darted back, laced with unease. Lisa posted something on her feed, a blurry shot of the entrance, captioned, "Reunion Surprise, Shneen Unexpected Guests." And soon, phones buzzed with notifications, the digital echo amplifying the stares. Emily moved through the hall with the wolves in tow, not clinging but connected, accepting a plastic cup of punch from Hargrove as he pulled up a chair at a corner table. "You look strong, Emily," he said quietly, his voice carrying the faint tremor of age. "These folks, they never left the bleachers. You did." His eyes, kind behind wire-rimmed glasses, held no pity, just the recognition of endurance. She nodded, the lump in her throat easing as she sipped the sweet liquid, the tartness grounding her. Rico wandered to the buffet, piling a plate with sliders, his casual stride drawing wary paths from the crowd. A few brave souls approached. Tim, the quiet artist from art class, now a graphic designer with a tentative smile. "Hey, Em. Didn't expect this. Good to see you." No probing, just a handshake, his gaze flicking to Jack's with neutral curiosity. The wolves accepted it without fanfare, Jack's tipping his head in acknowledgement, the exchange weaving subtle threads of normalcy. But tension coiled tighter when Chad's group reconvened near the dance floor, their laughter louder, gestures broader. "Remember when we locked her in the chem lab?" One slurred, voice carrying over the music. Emily froze mid-conversation with Hargrove, the memory flashing. The dark room, the panic rising like bile, her pleas unheard until a janitor found her hours later. Jax's hand found her shoulder again, firm and unyielding, his eyes locking on the group without a word. The touch anchored her, pulling her from the spiral. No outburst, just presence. A moral line drawn in silence. Lena murmured, "Your call, Em. We follow." The choice hung there, heavy as the bass vibrating through the floor. Confront the ghosts, or let the Brotherhood's quiet justice speak? Emily's chest rose and fell, the hall's lights blurring slightly with unshed tears. But she straightened, the evolution stirring within, from the girl who'd hidden to the woman who'd chosen protection over isolation. Across the room, Chad caught the shift, his bravado cracking as he noticed the wolves' unblinking watch. The blonde tugged his arm, whispering urgently, and for the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. A man confronting the mirror of his past, unpolished and unforgiving. The night deepened, the moral suspense building like storm clouds on the horizon, promising revelations that would redefine not just Emily's story, but the fragile humanity hidden in every shadowed corner. The music pulsed through the hall like a heartbeat out of sync, the DJ's playlist dipping into slower territory now. Every rose has its thorn, the guitar riff weaving through the haze of half-empty glasses and flickering candles on tables. Emily sat at the corner with Mr. Hargrove, the plastic chair creaking under her as she traced the rim of her punch cup, the sweet residue sticky on her fingertips. The teacher's stories flowed gentle, anecdotes from their shared past. The time she'd aced his essay on the Dust Bowl, her words painting migrations that mirrored her own unspoken flight. His voice was a low anchor, pulling her from the periphery where eyes still lingered, but the air hummed with undercurrents, the kind that built like pressure in a sealed engine. Across the room, Chad's group had regrouped, their laughter a jagged edge against the melody, voices slurring thicker with each round from the bar. Emily caught fragments, names from the past, triumphs inflated like tires overpumped. But then Chad's gaze locked on her again, his posture loosening with liquid courage. He pushed off the counter, weaving through the dance floor with purposeful strides, the blonde trailing and a couple of his old teammates flanking him like echoes. "So, Emily," he called out, loud enough to turn heads, his smile all teeth and no warmth. "You gonna grace us with a story? What's life like out in the boonies with your crew?" The word dripped implication, drawing snickers from his shadows, the room's energy tilting toward spectacle once more. Jax, seated nearby with arms crossed over his vest, didn't rise, but his eyes narrowed, the faint scar on his knuckles whitening as his fist tightened subtly under the table. Lena leaned forward, her fork pausing mid-air over a neglected plate of appetizers, while Rico, who'd been chatting quietly with Tim, straightened, his casual lean against the wall shifting to something vigilant. Emily felt their tension coil around her like exhaust fumes, thick and protective, but she met Chad's approach head-on, her pulse a steady thrum in her ears. The moral crossroads sharpened. Swallow the bait and let the past devour the present, or draw the line with words forged in years of quiet survival. "Life's good, Chad," she said, her voice carrying clear over the music. No tremor now, just the raw edge of truth. "Better than hiding behind cheers and crowds." The words landed soft but pointed, a mirror held up to his polished facade. Hargrove cleared his throat, a subtle nod of approval, but Chad's face flushed, the quarterback mask slipping into something uglier, surprise twisting to defensiveness. "Hiding? That's rich coming from the girl who vanished after graduation. What, Mommy's illness too much for you? Or just couldn't hack it?" The jab was low, aimed at the wound she'd guarded fiercest, the cancer that had hollowed her home, her mother's final breaths, a secret she'd never shared with tormentors. The room stilled, the song's lyrics hanging ironic in the air, as if the universe scripted the cruelty. Emily's breath hitched, a sharp inhale that tasted of stale punch and regret, her hand trembling on the table until Lena's foot nudged hers under it, a silent morse of solidarity. Jax's jaw clenched, the contained rage flickering in his eyes like embers in a dying fire. He'd lost his own father to illness during deployment, the helplessness a ghost that haunted his rides. But he held, the Brotherhood's code whispering restraint. Protect, don't provoke, let justice unfold in the quiet spaces. Rico stepped forward then, not aggressive, just present, his voice low and even. "Easy there, man. Nights for remembering, not reopening graves." Chad barked a laugh, but it rang hollow, his teammates shifting uncomfortably as the whispers spread. Phones forgotten, replaced by uneasy glances. Lisa hovered at the edge, her earlier glee curdling into hesitation, the influencer's filter cracking under the weight of real consequence. "Chad, come on," she murmured, tugging his sleeve, but he shrugged her off, emboldened by the audience. "What are you gonna do, biker boy? Rev your engine and scare us off? This is our reunion." The challenge hung, baiting the wolves into the stereotype the world loved to paint, leather-clad brutes itching for a fight. Emily rose slowly, the chair scraping like a confession, her eyes locking on Chad's, not with hate, but a compassion born of seeing through the bluster to the boy who'd peaked at 18, now chasing echoes in a life of facades. "It's not about scaring anyone," she said, the words steady, laced with the introspection of desert nights alone. "It's about showing up. All of us." The vulnerability cracked her voice on the last syllable, a tear pricking unbidden, but she didn't wipe it away. In that raw exposure, the room shifted again. Sarah from the yearbook edging closer, her floral dress rustling, face paling as memories of her own complicity surfaced. Tim nodded from his spot, the artist in him recognizing the humanity in the margins. Jack stood then, his movement fluid, towering without looming, and placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. Warm, unyielding, the gesture speaking volumes of the loyalty that had pulled him from his own darkness. "We're here 'cause she asked," he said simply, addressing Chad but eyeing the crowd. "That's family. You got that?" The question wasn't accusatory, just probing, peeling back the layers of assumption. Chad faltered, his bravado deflating like a punctured tire, the blonde pulling him back toward the bar with urgent whispers. The confrontation ebbed, not in explosion, but in the slow burn of reflection, the hall's lights casting long shadows that danced with unspoken regrets. As the song faded, applause polite and scattered, Emily sank back into her seat, the adrenaline ebbing into a quiet ache. Hargrove squeezed her hand, his grip papery but firm. "Strength isn't in the roar, Emily. It's in the stand." The wolves resettled around her, Rico sliding her a fresh drink, Lena's nod a wordless vow. The tension lingered, a promise of escalations yet to come, retaliations whispered in corners, risks mounting as the night wore thin. But in the hush that followed, compassion threaded through the rage, a reminder that redemption waited not in vengeance, but in the bonds that refused to break. Outside, the desert wind picked up, rattling the windows like a call to deeper truths, the moral arc bending toward revelations that would shatter the illusions once and for all. The hall's atmosphere hung heavy now, like the aftermath of a dust storm settling over cracked earth, the music's tempo quickening into an upbeat "Don't Stop Believin'" that clashed with the undercurrents of unease. Emily's hand still trembled faintly as she set down her cup, the plastic rim dented from her grip, the sweet tang lingering on her tongue like unfinished business. Hargrove's words echoed softly in her mind, strength in the stand, but the room's eyes bore into her, a mosaic of curiosity and discomfort, the white linens on tables rumpling under shifting elbows. Jax resumed his seat with a measured exhale, his broad frame a bulwark against the tide, while Lena's gaze swept the crowd like a sentinel scanning horizons. Rico lingered by the wall, his easy posture belying the coiled readiness in his stance, the faint scent of his leather vest mingling with the hall's stale air of catered regrets. Chad had retreated to the bar, his back turned but shoulders hunched, the blonde whispering urgently into his ear as he nursed a fresh drink, the ice clinking like brittle apologies. The confrontation hadn't exploded into chaos, but it simmered, feeding whispers that rippled outward, groups huddling closer, phones tucked away, but glances sharpening. Emily felt exposed, the black dress clinging like a second skin under the heat of scrutiny, yet the wolf's presence wrapped around her, a quiet armor forged in garage fires and midnight rides. She caught Sarah's eye across the room, the yearbook editor's face a mask of forced cheer, her floral dress wilting slightly at the edges. Sarah had been complicit once, giggling along with the pranks, but now her steps faltered as she approached the table, a hesitant smile cracking her poise. "Emily," Sarah said, voice pitched low, almost swallowed by the song's chorus. I didn't mean for it to go like that back then. We were kids." Her words tumbled out, laced with the raw edge of hindsight, her fingers twisting a napkin into shreds. Emily's chest tightened, a flicker of old hurt warring with the compassion stirring in its wake. These people, once architects of her isolation, now adrift in their own unexamined lives. "Kids who knew better," Emily replied softly, not accusing, just stating the truth that had simmered for a decade. Sarah's eyes glistened, a single tear tracing a path through her makeup, and she nodded, retreating with a murmured, "I'm sorry," that hung in the air like exhaust fading on the wind. The moment broke the spell for a few others. Tim slid into a chair nearby, his graphic designer's hands sketching absent patterns on the tablecloth, and shared a quiet story of his own post-graduation struggles. Rejections from art schools, a marriage that crumbled under financial strain. "You weren't the only one faking it," he admitted, his voice barely above the music, eyes meeting hers with shared vulnerability. Lena listened without interrupting, her nod encouraging, while Jax's silence invited trust, his veteran's patience a balm for confessions long buried. The table grew, a small island of introspection amid the hall's fading revelry, the moral suspense easing into tentative bridges. But outside this fragile circle, retaliation brewed, Chad's group clustering tighter, their laughter forced, gestures broader as if to reclaim the narrative. It escalated subtly at first, a shadow detaching from the bar. One of Chad's old teammates, a burly man named Mike with a real estate badge pinned to his lapel, lumbered over, beer in hand sloshing precariously. His face flushed, eyes glassy from the open bar, he loomed near Rico, voice booming over the speakers. "You guys look like you wandered off a movie set. What, protecting the charity case?" The slur landed heavy, drawing chuckles from his entourage, the room's energy tilting once more toward division. Rico met his gaze evenly, his tattooed knuckles flexing around an empty glass. But he didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he set the glass down with deliberate calm, the clink echoing like a gavel. "Nah, man. Just here for her. Same as you, I figure." Mike's laugh barked out, but it faltered under Jax's unblinking stare. The president's eyes holding the weight of deserts crossed and brothers lost, a quiet rage contained like fuel in a tank. Emily's heart pounded, the risk palpable now. Escalation could shatter the night into something ugly, police lights flashing in the lot, reputations cemented in misunderstanding. She stood, placing a hand on Rico's arm, the touch grounding them both, her voice cutting through. "Mike, remember the homecoming game? You blocked for Chad like it was life or death. This is my block." The words carried the tremor of emotion, a trembling hand extended not in fight, but in the compassion of shared history, flawed and human. The hall hushed further, the DJ pausing tracks as if sensing the pivot, the air thick with the scent of cooling food and unspoken guilts. Mike blinked, the beer pausing mid-sip, his bravado cracking under the raw honesty. A man who'd once been the hero, now confronting the bystander he'd become. Chad watched from afar, his face paling as the blonde pulled him aside, their argument a low murmur lost in the tension. Lisa hovered nearby, her phone lowered, the influencer's gloss peeling to reveal unease. Perhaps a memory of her own overlooked pains. The wolves didn't advance. Their protection was in the stand, the loyalty that refused to mirror the cruelty thrown at them. Jax's hand rested lightly on the table, a gesture of restraint, his voice low to Emily alone. "Your lead, kid. We hold the line." In that suspended breath, a deeper truth began to surface, glinting like chrome in moonlight. Mike muttered something, an apology garbled by drink, and backed away, the group dispersing like smoke, the confrontation diffusing into awkward retreats. Emily sank back, a long exhale escaping her, the emotional turn blooming. Not victory in volume, but in the quiet revelation of humanity's fragile threads. The Brotherhood's code pulsed stronger. No one hurts those we protect, not through rage, but through the unyielding compassion that outlasted the storm. Hargrove raised his glass in a silent toast, his eyes misty, while outside, the desert wind whispered against the windows, carrying hints of confessions yet to come, risks mounting toward a late unveiling that would bind wounds long festering. The night wore thinner, the moral arc curving toward redemption's edge, where loyalty and forgiveness intertwined, like roads converging at dawn. If this story already has your heart, hit the like button. It helps the story of Emily reach more people who still believe in humanity. The hall's lights dimmed slightly as the DJ transitioned to a haunting cover of Landslide, the acoustic guitar strings vibrating through the air like fragile confessions, pulling the room into a reluctant intimacy. Emily sat motionless, her fingers interlaced on the table, the cool condensation from a forgotten water glass seeping into her skin. The confrontation with Mike had ebbed, leaving a residue of awkward silences that clung like desert dust, the crowd fracturing into smaller groups, some retreating to the dance floor with forced twirls, others clustering at the edges, their whispers a low hiss against the melody. Jax's hand had withdrawn from the table, but his presence lingered, a steady warmth at her side, his breathing even, measured, the faint scent of motor oil and rain-damp leather grounding her in the moment. She glanced at him, catching the subtle furrow in his brow, the way his eyes scanned the room not with aggression, but with the quiet vigilance of a man who'd guarded convoys through hostile nights. The wolves had held their line, their restraint a testament to the code that bound them. Loyalty over impulse, protection woven from threads of shared scars. Rico leaned against a nearby pillar, his arms crossed loosely, but Emily saw the tension in his jaw, the way his gaze tracked Chad's retreating form. Lena sipped her water slowly, her free hand drumming a soft rhythm on her knee, a medic's habit to steady nerves in the face of unseen wounds. They hadn't spoken since the standoff, but their silence spoke volumes. The rage simmered, contained, waiting for her signal. Across the hall, the retaliation brewed in shadows. Chad stood at the bar, his back rigid, gesturing animatedly to a tight knot of his old circle. Mike nursing his beer with sullen glares, Lisa scrolling her phone with feigned disinterest, her thumbs flying across the screen. Emily's stomach twisted as she imagined the posts, blurry images of leather vests and stern faces, captions twisting the night into a circus of mockery. The moral suspense coiled tighter, a spring wound by years of buried hurts, the risk of escalation hanging like thunderheads on the horizon. She could leave now, slip out into the cooling night with the wolves' engines as her escape, preserving the fragile peace she'd claimed. Or stay, letting the confrontation unfold, forcing the truths to surface in the raw light of exposure. Hargrove broke the quiet at their table, his voice soft, laced with the gravel of decades teaching reluctant lessons. These reunions, they're mirrors, Emily. Not always kind ones. He adjusted his glasses, the lenses catching the light in a brief glint, revealing eyes etched with quiet wisdom. She'd confided in him once, years ago, after a locker room prank left her books ruined and her spirit frayed. He'd listened then, without pity, offering only, "History remembers the resilient, not the rulers." Now, his words stirred something deeper, a tremor in her chest that blurred the line between anger and ache. She nodded, her throat tight, the song's lyrics wrapping around her like a shroud. Can the child within my heart rise above? Can I sail through the change-in ocean tides? The decision crystallized in that introspection, her hand unclenching as she pushed back from the table. "I need to talk to him," she murmured to Jax, her voice barely audible over the music. But he heard, the subtle tilt of his head, the affirming squeeze of his shoulder against hers. No questions, just trust. The Brotherhood's faith in her evolution from shadowed survivor to one who faced the storm. Lena rose with her, a shadow at her flank, while Rico fell in step behind, their movements synchronized, unhurried. The hall seemed to contract as they crossed the floor, the wooden planks creaking under boots and heels, the air thickening with the mingled scents of perfume, sweat, and spilled champagne. Chad turned as they approached, his eyes narrowing, the flush from earlier drinks deepening into something defensive. The blonde at his side stepped back, her heels clicking nervously, while Mike loomed half a pace behind, fists balled loosely at his sides. Lisa pocketed her phone, her curated smile faltering into uncertainty. "What now, Em?" Chad said, his tone laced with bravado, but his voice cracked on the edge, betraying the boy beneath the man. The group tightened, a wall of folded arms and skeptical stares, the whispers from nearby tables amplifying into a distant roar in Emily's ears. She stopped a few feet away, the space between them charged, her heart pounding like an idling engine. "This isn't about winning, Chad," she said, the words emerging steady, forged in the quiet hours of diner shifts and desert drives. "It's about what we did. What you did." Her hand trembled slightly, gesturing to the hall, the banners, the faces frozen in half-turned curiosity. Jack stood silent at her right, his presence a contained force, the faint tick of his watch the only sound from their side. Lena's breath was even, Rico's stance relaxed yet alert, their quiet compassion a counterpoint to the rising tension. Chad's laugh was sharp, but it died quickly, his eyes flicking to the wolves before returning to her. Ancient history. Grow up. But the deflection rang hollow, and in that pause, the deeper truth began to fracture the surface, a late revelation glinting like sunlight on cracked pavement. Emily's voice softened, emotion threading through like rain on dust. "My mom died that summer, Chad, alone, because I was too ashamed to bring friends home. Friends like you pretended to be." The admission hung, raw and unfiltered, her eyes holding his, the trembling hand now steady at her side. The room's murmurs faded, the song swelling to its bridge, as if the night itself held its breath. Chad's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing, the quarterback's poise crumbling under the weight of unintended consequence. Mike shifted uncomfortably, his bravado evaporating, while Lisa's hand flew to her mouth, a gasp escaping. Whispers erupted anew, but they carried a different tone, shock mingling with dawning regret. Jax's hand brushed Emily's arm, a gesture of solidarity, his own losses echoing in the subtle tightening of his grip. A father gone too soon, deployments that stole more than time. The Brotherhood's moral code pulsed stronger, their silent judgment not vengeful, but illuminating. The humanity behind the leather, the empathy veiled in toughness. In that unveiling, the confrontation pivoted, not to blows, but to the quiet unraveling of facades. Chad stepped forward, his voice low, hoarse. "I didn't know." The words were inadequate, a murmur lost in the music, but they cracked the armor, exposing the man who'd carried his own guilts, unspoken and heavy. Emily nodded, tears tracing silent paths down her cheeks, the emotional turn complete. Forgiveness, not as weakness, but as the ultimate strength, born of compassion that transcended the scars. The wolves encircled her loosely, their presence a shield-turned embrace, as the hall's lights flickered, casting long shadows that danced with possibility. Outside, the desert wind howled softly against the windows, carrying the promise of dawn's clarity, where redemption waited in the spaces between accusation and absolution. The night stretched toward its close, the risks diffused into reflections, loyalty proving the truest justice in the quiet aftermath. The hall seemed to exhale in the wake of Emily's confession, the acoustic strains of Landslide fading into a hush, broken only by the distant clatter of a dropped fork and the soft rustle of shifting chairs. Her tears cooled on her cheeks, tracing paths that felt like the first rain after a long drought, cleansing without erasing the scars. Chad stood frozen before her, his face a map of unraveling, eyes wide, mouth slack. The man who'd once commanded stadiums now diminished by the echo of her truth. The blonde at his side clutched his arm, her nails digging in like anchors, while Mike and Lisa hovered in stunned silence, the group's fortress crumbling under the weight of unintended history. Jax's hand remained on Emily's arm, steady as the hum of an idling engine. his touch a silent vow that she'd never stand alone in the unraveling. The moral suspense that had gripped the night crested then, not in shouts or shoves, but in the quiet fracture of illusions. Whispers spread like ripples on still water, drawing more faces from the shadows. Former classmates pausing mid-conversation, their name tags glinting under the dimmed lights, expressions shifting from voyeurism to uneasy reflection. Sarah, the yearbook editor, emerged from the crowd, her floral dress disheveled now, steps hesitant as she reached Emily's side. "I remember your mom," she murmured, voice thick with regret, her hand hovering before gently touching Emily's elbow. "She came to parents' night once, smiled through everything. We were awful." The admission hung raw, a small act of kindness piercing the veil, awakening echoes of the girl Sarah had ignored in hallways lined with lockers and lies. Emily nodded, the lump in her throat easing into something softer. Compassion, unbidden, blooming amid the ache. It wasn't absolution handed freely, but a bridge extended, fragile and human. Chad swallowed hard, his quarterback shoulders slumping, the beer forgotten in his fist. I didn't. God, I'm sorry." The words stumbled out, hoarse and halting, stripped of bravado, revealing the fractures beneath his success. A recent divorce whispered about in Reno circles. A career built on deals that left him hollow. Nights staring at ceilings, wondering if the cheers had ever been real. In that vulnerability, the deeper truth surfaced, glinting like hidden chrome on a forgotten bike. A connection to her past she'd never suspected. "Your mom," he continued, voice dropping to a near whisper. "She worked at my dad's office, part-time after the chemo. Filed papers, kept things straight. Dad said she was the toughest one there, even on bad days. I saw her once, in the lobby, smiling at everyone, like nothing hurt." The revelation landed like a slow-rolling thunder, tying the threads of their lives in ways Emily had never imagined. Her mother, the quiet fighter who'd scrubbed floors and sewn clothes by lamplight, had brushed against Chad's world without resentment, her kindness a silent rebuke to the cruelties her daughter endured. Jax's grip tightened fractionally, his own eyes shadowing with memory. His father, lost to a similar illness during his last deployment, tended by nurses whose compassion had been his only comfort in sterile rooms. The iron wolves shifted subtly, Lena's breath catching, Rico's stance softening. They knew loss like this, the kind that forged unbreakable bonds in the quiet aftermath of grief. No one spoke, but the air thickened with shared humanity, the bikers' tough exteriors cracking to reveal the hearts that beat beneath. Veterans and wanderers who'd chosen protection over isolation, echoing the strength Emily's mother had embodied. The tension, so sharp moments before, diffused into something profound, a contained rage yielding to quiet justice. Chad stepped back, rubbing his face with a trembling hand, the blonde guiding him toward a side table where they sank into chairs. Heads bowed in murmured conversation. Mike followed, his burly frame deflated, muttering apologies to no one in particular as he wandered to the bar for water instead of whiskey. Lisa deleted her half-formed post with a swipe, her phone screen dimming like a closing curtain, and joined Sarah in tentative nods toward Emily's table. The hall's energy shifted, the DJ sensing the mood and cueing a softer track. Wonderwall, its melody weaving through the space like forgiveness tentatively offered. Emily returned to her seat, the wolves enveloping her without crowding, Jack sliding a napkin her way to dab at her cheeks. "You did good, kid," he said low, his voice gravel-warm, the faint lines around his eyes crinkling with pride. Lena squeezed her shoulder, Rico offering a thumbs up that hid the emotion in his gaze. They were more than escorts. They were the family she'd found on dusty roads, their loyalty a redemption for the isolation of her youth. Hargrove raised his glass again, this time joined by Tim and a few others. A quiet toast rippling outward. Conversations resumed, softer now, laced with reflections. Stories of lost jobs, broken homes, the peaks that had plateaued into plateaus. The mockery that had simmered at the evening's start evaporated, replaced by an unspoken pact. The world's judgments on the margins, on bikers and losers, exposed as the true illusions. As the clock neared midnight, the crowd thinned. Goodbyes exchanged with lingering handshakes and numbers swapped, the hall emptying into the cooling Nevada night. Emily walked out flanked by the wolves, the gravel crunching under their boots, engines rumbling to life in the lot like a chorus of affirmation. The stars wheeled overhead, vast and indifferent, but the desert air carried a lightness, the weight of 10 years lifted not by vengeance, but by the courage to reveal and the compassion to receive. Jax handed her a helmet, his nod profound. Road's clearer now. She climbed on, arms wrapping around him, the vibration thrumming through her as they pulled away, taillights fading into the horizon. In the quiet that followed, Emily understood. Strength wasn't in the roar of arrival or the freeze of stairs, but in the silent bonds that protected the vulnerable, the forgiveness that mended what society deemed broken. Family was the ones who showed up, leather and all, turning isolation into unbreakable alliance. And in that redemption, humanity endured, not in grand gestures, but in the small, trembling acts of grace that lingered long after the engines cooled. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching the case of Emily's Escort. See you in the next one.